Thank you. I just said to the speaker, I can tell he wasn't sworn as he went through that. Whenever I think I'm the most preeminent anything, my mind goes back to a moment. It was about 10 years ago now on the Washington Mall. And I was at that point on my way to give a talk about Andrew Jackson. And a woman ran up to me, which doesn't happen enough, or ever, actually. And she said, "Oh, my God, it's you." And I said, "Well, yes, existentially speaking, that's hard to argue with." And she said, "Your books have meant so much to me. I love them. Will you wait right here? I'm going to go buy your book and have you sign it." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I stood there thinking, this is the way the world is supposed to be. Women are supposed to run up to you. They're supposed to buy your book. It was a twofer. Hand to God, she brought back John Grisham's latest novel. So, as a distinguished guest, so whenever I think I'm that distinguished, I remind myself that somewhere in America there's a woman with a forged copy of The Runaway Jury, right? Because you have to sign it. You can't. So, anyway. And this is a significant act of ecumenical diversity for you all to have a Tennessean come to you on this day. So I'm delighted. The story that we commemorate today began with dreams of God and of gold, but not necessarily in that order. Issued by King James I in 1606, the first charter of Virginia was 3,805 words long. 98 of those words were about carrying religion, as it put it, to such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God. 97% of the charter concerned the taking of, as it put it, all the lands, woods, soil, grounds, havens, ports, rivers, mines, minerals, marshes, waters, fishing, commodities, as well as orders to dig, mine, and search for all manner of mines of gold, silver, and copper. And so God and Mammon propelled men across the seas, and the evolutionary beginnings of popular government came soon after their arrival. We are here this morning in large measure because in 1618, a faction within the Virginia Company, led by Sir Edwin Sandys, successfully argued for a series of reforms resulting in what the governor and the speaker have just told us was the Great Charter, a set of instructions sent to Governor Yardley, who was to begin his term in 1619. Officials of the company authorized the governor to oversee the selection of 2 male settlers from each of the 11 major settlement areas to attend a General Assembly here in Jamestown. This new form of government divided political and judicial power between the governor, a council appointed by the Virginia Company, and the new General Assembly. The Assembly's first meeting took place 4 centuries ago this very day, from Tuesday, July 30th, through Sunday, August 4th. Our friend John Porey, Secretary of the Colony, served as speaker. 6 appointed council members attended, along with 20 of the 22 selected burgesses. And so representative government in the New World began. As Abraham Lincoln reminded us, we cannot escape history. And I'd argue that we should not want to or try to. For by our heritage and our hope, we as Americans are charged with a sacred duty to fulfill the injunction that to whom much is given, much is expected. And as Americans, we have been given much. And those gifts in many ways are rooted here at Jamestown. Gifts of liberty and of opportunity, of self-government, and of what Lincoln was to call a fair chance to enable us to lead lives of prosperity and of peace. Which is why this is a good moment and a good place to reflect on who we've been, who we are, and where we might go in the next 400 years. For to know what's come before is to be armed against despair. If the men and women of the past, with all their flaws and limitations and ambitions and appetites, could press on through ignorance and superstition, through racism and sexism, through selfishness and greed, then perhaps we too can take another step toward a more perfect union. History has the capacity to bring us together, for our story is ultimately one of obstacles overcome, crises resolved, and freedom expanded. The story, Jamestown's story and America's, is about the best of us and, yes, the worst of us. There was human enslavement. There was the abuse and dispossession of the native inhabitants, some of whom, it should be said, were essential to the survival of Jamestown in its earliest days. There was the subjugation of women. There is, our mixed record of welcoming new immigrants to our shores. And yet, so much of American history is captured in the phrase, and yet. And yet in this place, representative government, government of the people, not of princes or prelates, began. This first assembly on the banks of the James was the forerunner of the United States Congress, of the other 49 state legislatures, and of all other American legislative bodies. In the fullness of time, this first planting blossomed into a worldwide flowering of democratic institutions and of free nations, a development in which American leadership and sacrifice played and should play an indispensable role. We should note, too, that the first Thanksgiving in America can be traced not to the Yankees at Plymouth Rock, but to our fellow Southerners here in Virginia, an instance of New England cultural imperialism we should not reward. After all, don't we throw better parties? As a Tennessean, I would say so. I'm a graduate of the University of the South. My best friend in college was from Lynchburg, Tennessee. His name was Jack Daniels. You all know him. You know what I mean. We should not sentimentalize the American experience. The nation has been morally flawed from the beginning. We must be honest about that. And our honesty should lead us to do all that we can do to be about the work of justice. In August 1619, the White Lion, a privateering vessel, arrived at Port Comfort, Virginia, at present-day Hampton. The ship held 20 and odd Africans who were traded in exchange for provisions. Originally captured by Portuguese slavers in West Central Africa, these were the first recorded Africans to arrive in English North America. And they were treated much as slaves were in other European colonies, regardless of age or gender. The irony was not lost on the Old World. How is it, the English man of letters Samuel Johnson asked, that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty from among the drivers of Negroes? How is it? Well, this is how. We are not perfect. We are a fallen and a sinful people. We get some things right and some things wrong. We try and we fail, but we must try again and again and again, for only in trial is progress possible. And the story of America is, in fact, the story of progress. At our best, we reach out, we look ahead, and we dream big. And at our best, we close the gap between the ideal and the real. The test of a nation, like the test of an individual, cannot be perfection, for perfection is not possible until the arrival of the new heaven and the new earth. The test, rather, turns on how often we heed our better angels rather than our worst instincts. The work of America is not done. The American Revolution, indeed the American evolution, unfolds still. That is our blessing and our burden. Extremism, racism, nativism, xenophobia, and isolationism, driven by a fear of the unknown, tend to spike in periods of stress, a period like our own. As we gather here, faith in representative institutions is ebbing. Reflexive partisanship is the order of the day. Too many seem more interested in producing heat than shedding light. Our politics rewards the clenched fist and the harsh remark more than the open hand and the welcoming word. Yet, history teaches us that we've always grown stronger the more widely we've opened our arms and the more generously we've interpreted the most important sentence ever originally rendered in English, Thomas Jefferson's assertion that all men are created equal. I will say I am careful about hyperbolic claims like the most important sentence in the English language, largely because of the old story about the Texas school board candidate who was against teaching Spanish in the public schools and said on the stump one day, if English was good enough for our Lord Jesus Christ, it's good enough for Texas. So, but that's in Texas, so we won't worry about that. I also point out that if it weren't for Tennessee, Texas would still be part of Spain, and they don't like that at all. First time I met George W. Bush, I told him that when he was governor. He went, it's pretty funny, jerk. We don't tend to build monuments to people who build walls. We build monuments to people who open doors. We honor liberators, not captors. The battle between hope and fear, between what's right and what's convenient, between the larger good and personal interest, those are the battles that have been fought in our common experience for 400 years, and they unfold still. And the terrain on which light and dark contend is nothing less than the arena of the soul. Socrates believed the soul was the animating force of reality. In the second chapter of Genesis, the soul was life itself. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. In the Greek New Testament, when Jesus says, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends, the word for life could also be translated as soul. And our history is determined, our lives are determined, by the outcome of the clashes within our soul, both individual and national, between liberty and slavery, between grace and rage, and between kindness and cruelty. Good, great good, dwells in our national soul, yet there is evil too. Good and evil, such is the stuff of the unfolding lives of nations down the centuries. During a secret summit at sea in August of 1941, Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill attended a church service aboard the HMS Prince of Wales. Together they sang, O God, our help in ages past, onward Christian soldiers, an eternal Father, strong to save. Afterward, FDR remarked, onward Christian soldiers. Yes, we are Christian soldiers, and we will go on with God's help. And on we went. A product of that rendezvous between FDR and Churchill was the Atlantic Charter, a statement of war aims in the struggle against fascism and totalitarianism. Without a great charter in Jamestown, there might not have been an Atlantic Charter amid the winds of the Second World War. More broadly, without a Jamestown in 1619, there might not have been a Lexington and Concord in 1775. Nor a Philadelphia in 1776 and 1787, nor a Seneca Falls in 1848, nor an Appomattox in 1865, nor an Omaha Beach in 1944, nor a Selma in 1965, nor a Stonewall in 1969, nor a Berlin in 1989. In our search, in our hunger for a way forward through the maelstrom of Twitter and of tribalism, I would commend the utility of history, the very kind of remembrance we're undertaking at this hour. The beginning of wisdom lies in an appreciation of the past, which, as William Faulkner taught us, isn't dead, it isn't even past. What can we learn from the kind of history we contemplate today? That the perfect should not be the enemy of the good, that compromise is the oxygen of democracy, and that we learn the most from those who came before, not by gazing up at them adoringly or down on them condescendingly, but looking them in the eye and taking them for what they were, human, not as impossibly perfect heroes or as hopelessly irredeemable villains. Knowing the history of freedom is not only illuminating, but enabling. A person who understands that the past and all its glory and grandeur and horror and injustice understands that the path of civilization, while never straight, is essentially upward, forward, to what Churchill once called the broad and sunlit uplands. For all its faults, Jamestown was the place where different cultures first came together in English North America, setting the stage for racial, ethnic, and eventually religious and other forms of diversity. Capitalism and private enterprise are rooted here too. Jamestown is a mirror of who we were and who we are. Dreamers and doers came here, and they built, and we stand in the light of their achievement. In our finest hours, America has been about life, it's been about liberty, it's been about the pursuit of happiness, not just for some, but for all. And in that history, history rooted here in this place, lies our hope. Thank you.